I'm going to give a very brief description of the Moti Reentry Band. And Moti is MOTI, Music on the Inside. It's an organization founded by Alina Bloomgarden and Winter Marsalis. And they've been teaching music and providing instruments for prisoners who maybe are soon to be released, or just have musical talent or a desire to play. So they formed a band called the Reentry Band. So it's people who were previously incarcerated and are rebuilding their lives. And I have the privilege of, I'm leading that band. It's one of those things you don't wake up thinking this is something I'm going to do. And when you find yourself in the middle of it, I can't overemphasize how profoundly moving it has been. So I'm going to save talking at length about that until another episode when maybe I'll get Alina Bloomgarden to join on here. It's her passion to help other people, particularly in this area. This came from, she heard that Louis Armstrong had been incarcerated at age 11, and somebody gave him a trumpet or taught him trumpet or cornet, and that's where it all started for him. And that was such a huge bearing for her. And my cat's trying to get in on the scene here, and he loves to just jump up and walk across the keyboard. But my best things that I do were other people's ideas. I implement them, but I've spent north of 20 years, maybe 25 years, working with youth through the Jazz Standard Discovery Program. And one of the most impactful parts of that was the youth orchestra component, as we called it, the JSYO. That was James Polsky's idea, not mine. In fact, I thought it was a terrible idea because I thought it was a crowded field and that I wasn't going to be able to get players that could play at a certain level. I was thinking with an arranger's hat on. And while I just remember when he suggested it first, inwardly, while I was saying, no, I don't see how we can, I was actually starting to argue with myself internally, where I thought, you know what? This would be great if we could maybe approach it from an angle of playing music, not rehearsing, or no classroom. Rehearsing, yes, but the emphasis was on performance. And I think we came up with a pretty unique program, operated with, it was James' generosity to set it up. But we weren't getting the kind of budget that other organizations have, where they have a staff of 60 people reaching out to different schools nationwide or anything like that. We were doing this with a skeleton staff, and still do. And meanwhile, we get to see the development of these young musicians. So again, my best ideas originated somewhere else, and I'm grateful to have had the opportunity and continue to have the opportunity to implement them. So more on all these programs later. I just wanted to give people a brief overview, some of the things we're doing, and I haven't even talked about gigs yet. Welcome back to part 3. With only 29 subscribers at the time and only one episode in, I received a text from a filmmaker, someone I had already met with a few times. Long story short, it was clear very quickly that we were both on different paths and better off not collaborating. It did teach me that I need to be clear about something going forward. I am not looking just to get an IMDb credit on someone else's film, just to establish a track record. He had suggested at one point that I just plug in my guitar, play for about 4 minutes and stick some reverb on it. That would be a great opportunity for a young graduate of film school, a wonderful opportunity. But for me, at my age, I have faith that a life spent making music in numerous styles will in fact resonate with someone looking for a composer to collaborate with. I've had many years working with compositions that employ advanced harmonic progressions, etc., but I also want to experience creating soundscapes. I find some of them very soothing and love how others can create tension when required. Most importantly, I want to immerse myself in collaborations with directors who can say just in a few words things that will fire you up and fire up your creativity and your creative juices. I've seen some great interviews with an actor I love, Gary Oldman. In a few of them, he has made mention of how he acted in a scene he had prepped very hard for and knew he hadn't delivered what was required. The director was Christopher Nolan, and rather than give a lengthy dissertation of what he wanted from the actor, and not just any actor, he walked up to Oldman and whispered in his ear, "There's more at stake." And that elicited the required interpretation with only 4 words. Lest there be any misunderstanding, I fully expect to miss the mark sometimes, and in fact, recently participated in an online forum with composers who work in film, one of whom, the host actually, Christian Henson, the co-founder of Spitfire Audio, remarked on how much he loved receiving notes and then rewrites or updated versions that would follow. In that situation, he is clearly working in an environment of mutual trust and projects that inspire. There will be other situations that are fractious, and if earning $1 million plus to score a picture, I'll happily allow someone beat me up, figuratively of course, and then collect the paycheck riding off into the sunset. So if anyone wants to share their own experience in the comments below, I'll read all of them and may even use them as a vehicle for upcoming discussions or features as its own segment. And just a reminder, I will also be doing interviews with people from inside and outside music as we go along, because people do fascinate me and it's a form of storytelling. But I will be interviewing some people who've worked in film in different capacity, on the musical side, of course. Okay, so it's important for me, just back to the situation that I described earlier. The gentleman that reached out to me is an extraordinarily gifted cinematographer. His footage is amazing, but sometimes you just don't gel with somebody and you're better off just cutting your losses and moving forward. What I really want to experience is that collaboration. It's almost like the music is a character. All right, until the next time. So I want to talk about Louis Stewart, who was one of the most important people in my musical journey, flat out. Why? Because he was a world-class jazz guitar player who, without anyone really to base off, reached that level of mastery. He was born in Waterford, but very briefly they moved to Dublin, his family. But it's inexplicable, in the same way that Muhammad Ali from Louisville, Kentucky, or George Best from Belfast. There's no answer to how this mastery came along. It's just a unique gift and discipline and that goes with developing that. So my dad had pointed out Louis Stewart to me at a time when Louis was showing up on Irish TV, and he was away playing in Ronnie Scott's band. I remember Oscar Peterson mentioning him on his BBC show, and John Williams being interviewed alongside, not the Jaws and Star Wars John Williams, the classical guitarist John Williams, who's a huge star in the UK and did a lot to bring, classical guitar into the mainstream by appearing on comedians' shows and that were shown at the weekend. He would have instant exposure. Now, he was just full of praise for Louis Stewart's mastery, and Louis of course loved John's classical guitar playing. But the idea that we had a guitar player like that coming from Dublin, Louis would eventually move back to Dublin and he was done with teaching. He wouldn't teach, and everyone kept saying to me, it's just too bad you didn't come up a year ago or something, because he was teaching in Capel Street in some place or some school of music, and So I'm thinking, oh well, maybe he'll teach me privately. No, couldn't get him to do that. But I stalked him. Basically, I stalked him. That's what they call it nowadays. And the difference was I never got anything less than a sincere welcome. And I was hoping he'd sit down and share with me what Louis used to call guys like me who wanted the keys to the kingdom, so he put it. I just felt I see him doing things that I want to do, so why won't he show me? I even went to the extent one time of bringing a portable cassette player out with the tape in it, ready to go, and the lick I wanted. And it was, now that I remember, it was a thing in fourth tone, either going down in whole tones or minor thirds, but it was fourths. And I said to him, "What are you doing there?" And of course, in my visualization of this, he was going, "Oh, that's just a song," and he'd show me, and all of a sudden the world would open up for me. He clammed up and he just goes, "I don't know, some triplet thing." Made it clear that this was not the relationship that we were going to have. But what he did do was he started to play records for me and would talk me through what he liked about, pick any guitar player or pianist or any soloist. He would play these, tell me what he liked. I love how this guy built the solo. I love how Bill Evans comped behind here. Have you ever heard so-and-so? No. Okay, well, here's what I like about him. And he would play me examples. And what I didn't really realize at the time was he was teaching me how to listen, what to listen for. It was kind of like a jazz version of music appreciation, right? So while I would tend to be in the middle now, and I'll show people licks, especially if you think of somebody who's working a 40-hour week and they're taking lessons with you and they're hobbyists. They love music as much as I do. And if I could just give them a little something that'll elevate them to another level, I see the excitement in them. But I was different. I was somebody who was starting to very early on think I wanted to do this for my life, for a living, before I was showing any signs of talent to justify that. And Louis probably, I'm going to guess, thought it would be more beneficial for me if I worked a lot of this stuff out for myself. He did show me a couple of things afterwards when he was sharing something he picked up from George Van Eps. And I remember saying, "What was that again?" And years later, I was playing something that I copped from Johnny Smith. And George Benson asked me to play it about 3 or 4 times at different slowing down until he picked it up. And I just remember the surreal feeling of me showing George Benson something. And then George asked me, "Where did you get it?" And I said, you can't lie to somebody like him. I said I stole it from Johnny Smith. I'll never forget what happened after that, because he grabs the guitar and he goes, "Hey man, you want to see what I got from Johnny Smith?" And he starts playing a whole bunch of things that he had taken. And while he was in that frame of mind, I said to him, "What about, that wide arpeggio line that you play?" He goes, "Tal Farlow." He knew exactly what I was talking about, even though I hadn't fully described it. The other thing was the octaves that he does with the note in between. He told me he got the idea for that from Fats Waller playing organ and playing, rolling the octaves with the middle note in between. And I just thought, wow, it's so great that he came up with something so unique. Anyway, you can see where, okay, so I didn't go to college because there wasn't really any option to do that, but having Louis Stewart around set the bar impossibly high, it felt, because everybody judged you against him. Not just me, every guitar player came behind him. But what it meant for us was, when we would come to somewhere like New York or London, we always have to keep growing and learning, but we were ready to play and ready to learn from the experience of playing. So I kind of feel nowadays, when I look back, that they were unique times for young musicians. That you had the older greats around, and they would mentor you. Some would give you tough love. They'd kick you around the ring. They wouldn't tell you what key a song was in. No matter how many times it modulated, you were just thrown into the deep end. And you learned a lot from it. Others would show you a lot of kindness. I have to say, New York, I've experienced so much kindness when I moved here. Bucky Pizzarelli, unbelievable. Subject of a segment coming up to at some point. Pat Martino, 5-hour lesson for $25 is what he charged me at the time. 5-hour lesson. Intense. Changed my life. George Benson's kindness when I met him and became friends with him through Celino, his best friend. I was in Celino's band, Celino Clark. And a big one for me was meeting Bob Cranshaw at the Union when I just moved here, and Bob phoning to check in on me to see how I was settling in, and then giving me advice and becoming available for gigs with me. So can you imagine, me being able to say I've got Bob Cranshaw? I had Bob Cranshaw and Al Harewood playing together, one of the most swinging rhythm sections to ever play jazz. So I know, even in telling all of you this, how privileged I was and am to have played with those. So that's part of the catch up on my path. Hi everybody, David O'Rourke here, and I'm going to begin by thanking those of you who already subscribed, because that's what helps us get the information out there. And any of you who haven't, you know the routine: like, subscribe, and in the meantime, have a look at the first episode if you're new, where you will find out that our plans were to go outdoors as the weather is getting better here in the Jersey Shore area. So we're in Monmouth County, where Fort Monmouth, which is such a rich history. I'm actually standing here right now in Fort Monmouth. One recent factoid I learned about it that I found really interesting was the very first message to Fort Monmouth came from this communications into the area first, long before there was any mention of Netflix or anything. There were these huge domes that looked like early versions of satellite dishes, and they actually looked like they were made of fiberglass from the distance, that you could just punch a hole in it. I'm sure you couldn't, but I remember being fascinated and wondering about the history. And a good friend of mine, Tom Dunham, if he's looking in, was, I think, raised here. I met him when I was living in Weehawken, and we became great friends. And when we moved down here, he knew this area so well because he, I guess, grew up on the barracks. So he was in Germany, where his mother is from. I think his dad, being in the military, met the German lady, married, and they moved here, and he was stationed in Fort Monmouth. Now, why am I talking about all this? This is the site, really, where there's lots of space right here, right now. But a good friend of mine, Michael Aboud, and his business partner, Chris Silvento, invested in a large chunk of the land here with the intention of developing alongside. There's a river which we'll see in a little bit. I think is it the Navesink River? Shrewsbury River? It's one of the two. But it's really very special because for me, I asked Mike, did you know that Netflix were coming here when you bought all this land? And he said no. That was like 2 years later. So you can imagine the impact. Part of what's going in here, they're putting a boutique hotel. The first thing I thought of was, that's going to be booked out with artists, production crews, and I'd say all the local houses that are up for rent are going to be going for a premium, because the demand for accommodation in a town that, population 5,000 to 6,000 people in Oceanport. I don't know what Shrewsbury and Eatontown are, but combined, there's going to be a huge demand for restaurants. It's just going to change the dynamic of everything. Well, it was the news of Netflix coming here that I mentioned the last episode that ignited me into thinking, well, the mountain's coming to Muhammad. Maybe this is my chance to check a box that I always wanted to do, which is write music for film. What kind of film? Anything except porn. Right? Porn is a special. I heard somebody giving advice the other day saying, never score the money shot. You don't put music under the money shot. You don't know what the money shot is? I'm not going to tell you. You got to look it up. But documentaries have a particular sound nowadays. People are using sample libraries. You know, they're using orchestral writing if there's a budget. So there's tiers that people get in on. Sometimes it's just a solo instrument. So behind me, and we'll take a look a little bit later on, is Russell Hall, which I think might have been the headquarters. At once I thought it was the officers' mess, but I've been reliably informed by somebody I'm going to introduce you to on camera in probably the next episode. We're not going to do it in this one. I've been joined. You notice I'm not holding a selfie stick. It's not one of those walking around. Very good friend of mine, Paul Hester, who has, like, we all have our own stories, but he has quite the story in his path. I met him when I was taking photographs locally, and the most common thing I would hear was parents rushing out to an event that involved their kids and going, oh shit, my phone's not charged. And theatrical pause. Paul Hester will be there. He provided a free service, you don't mind me saying this, Paul, I'm sure. He provided a free service to so many people in this town for years that certainly most of the events that my kids growing up, I don't know how he had the time to do all this, but you'd get an email from him with a link telling you where the photographs were. So Paul has very kindly agreed to join the team here and help me get out and do this with a certainly more professional look than if I was walking around like this, you know, with a selfie stick. So we'd start by taking a look around some of the places. Right behind me is Russell Hall, as I said. We're going to take a look at where the boutique hotel is going to be, and maybe some of the construction going on, where there's going to be a lot of retail, some restaurants, coffee shops. It's very exciting for a town as small as this. So see you in a few. So I may or may not have mentioned when, you know, I just say Fort Monmouth, and I am fascinated by the history of the role it played. Like during the First World War, in the early days of radio, communication, and, you know, would have been a new thing. Edison, New Jersey, Thomas Edison, there's a lot of history of communication. But Fort Monmouth was the hub for all military communication with the United States military, and that's a rich history. I mentioned earlier about the broadcast to the moon and back. It was the first one that came from here. But what I really liked from performing at a few, what would you describe them as, information sessions for investors, it was made clear on each occasion that Michael Woodward and Chris O'Bento, they want to honor the history of the place. It's not just taking over a land. There's a history of that has to be honored, I believe. And I personally have, you know, a rich history of relatives in the Irish Rebellion, so I know how proud it is when you've had people in your family. So Michael, one of the things he did was he bought this helicopter. So there's no blades yet. It won't be operational. But every kid is going to want to have their photograph taken sitting as if they're flying a helicopter. It's going to be a huge attraction that I believe helps to kind of keep alive a memory of what this place was. Because, as I mentioned, my friend Tom Dunham earlier on, the people I know that they grew up here, you know, they were raised in this base. So families, if you ever talk to a military family, it's a different dimension. They're used to moving. But this place has such a rich history. visited earlier on, Russell Hall, was the headquarters. We're going to take a look at some of the more, you're going to see it in construction, the retail outlets. There's been an attempt to match the kind of red brick facade that, again, is honouring, instead of putting up one of these glass structures that we've seen so many of, that start to disappear into one another after a while. You see a lot of houses around here that were soldiers' quarters that have been, I think there might have been, what was the name of the asbestos that when they discovered late, I think they might have had to revamp some of them. But back in the day, nobody knew how harmful asbestos could be. So with minimal transformation, these houses are now providing a place to live for new families who won't have to try as hard to find out the history of where they're living, thanks to what Michael and Chris have done here. So keep an eye out. Maybe in later episodes we'll see the helicopter with blades. From what I understand is you cannot be too precious about your work. You cannot think, no, you can't take that out. I put a lot of thought into the orchestral writing of that. That's the part where the strings come in. No, you can't be like that. The director is going to turn around and he's going to tell you, okay, I'm going to take this, I like how this goes, and I'm going to put it together with this. Can you write me something else that'll link the two together? And I've been on some podcasts with where Christian Henson was kind enough to share his extensive experience scoring, smaller productions. And it fascinated me. He said, I love rewrites. He actually likes it when it's a very creative process for him too. You might have to get it wrong to get it right. Famous example, Jerry Goldsmith and Basic Instinct, apparently the main title that we hear, beautiful, amazing, mood-setting piece of music as you see the west coast of California, very Hitchcock-style shooting. The music is so perfectly suited to it. It was take 17, 16 of them rejected before he got to that. I only found that out recently. So before saying goodbye from this episode, I just want to mention some things we have planned for upcoming episodes. I'm going to be chatting with Alina Bloomgarden, for example, from Music on the Inside, and she's the founder of Jazz at Lincoln Center, along with Wynton Marsalis, who also helped her found MOTI, as we call it, Music on the Inside. I'll also have a segment coming up where I'm going to delve into the tools of the trade that I use for writing music. So we're talking about which notation apps let you in a little secret ahead of time. It's Dorico that I use for many reasons why I choose that. And what I'm recording on, I'm using Cubase because it's made by the same company as Dorico, and I figured the interaction would at some point mean a lot more than having to translate from one to the other. But I have to keep a copy of Sibelius active because I have so many years of work in that. I haven't kept a version of Finale for years because I think I converted pretty much most of everything I had in Finale over to Sibelius the hard way in those days via MIDI files. And I think when Music XML came in, I went back and exported a few that way, and that was quite successful. This is probably Greek to the non-musicians, but Music XML is a language basically that allows you to open up a file in any of the applications that create music notation programs, and it translates from one to the other. And quite accurately nowadays, it can get there. So people will know that Finale called it a day. They had their Finale, I guess. Sorry, we're into the dad jokes already. But it was kind of a shock to me because while it wasn't my favorite platform to work on, there were a lot of loyal users of it who had gotten used to it and had invested so much time learning how to use it, that the idea of learning a whole new program was kind of daunting. But I will say this for the Finale guys, you could do anything pretty much in Finale. It was just my complaint was you had to go through multiple menus and sub-menus to get there. And if you're under pressure, how much of that are you remembering unless you're using that particular facility all the time? But there's just something very forward thinking feeling that I get from Dorico, and I'll go into that in greater detail. But just to close out the segment on why I love Dorico, in the first major projects that I ever did using it, and then subsequent ones when I was a lot better versed in how to use certain aspects of the program, even using default settings, it's the first time in years where I've had people react going, man, these parts look great. What are you using? And I wouldn't have tweaked. The only time I tweaked the defaults was to make my own font settings, which is to create your own template. But the other one was one of the productions, it was for the Limerick Jazz Festival, required dialogue to be added in, which meant I had to radically change the page setting and how many systems of music you could see on one page. And that took me a little bit of tweaking and thinking and asking people questions. But it did it. But again, the parts looked so fantastic. When I did the blues project in Dublin, the guy who did the music prep for me there wrote to me and said, these parts look great. So I just sent them PDFs, by the way. But so kudos to the people who continue to raise the bar on trying to create something that saves time at rehearsals and looks good. You get less and less questions about, is this a B flat or is this... But I'm going to go into details about some of the challenges that I have that are probably coming from the world of jazz in any app. And the beautiful thing is that the various creators of software, they're trying to solve all these problems. So any that I might talk about might be outdated by even a few months. You never know what they're working on. But it's really fantastic when you see... It's like typing words for anyone who's not a musician, typing a letter and the words appear on screen. You're playing in notation and the notes appear on screen. And why is that such a big deal? Couldn't you write them? Well, you can change anything. And if your instrumentation changes, or somebody, you go, let's say you're doing a master class in some school, and you find out they've only 2 trombones, but they've about 6 really good French horn players. You could maybe come up with parts and put 2 horn players on a line or something like that to get the balance. But all is not lost, and it's all done via copy and paste instead of handwriting a whole new set of parts. But I got more into it now than I intended to. I will do a big section on this later on, going into some detail about why I really like working in the different platforms. Okay, see you then.